Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the last webinar in the Historic Venue series hosted by Canada's History Society. My name is Jessica Knapp, and I am the Online Engagement Coordinator at Canada's History Society, and I will be your host tonight. It does say Joel Ralph from the account that I am using, but let it be known, this is definitely Jessica Knapp. And you can email me. On the next slide, you'll have a link to my email if you have any questions about future webinars, and we can have that conversation there. So tonight, Edmonton's Historian Laureate, Danielle McKefsh, and I will bring you on a visual tour of some of the city's spaces where history and community meet, and hopefully spark new ideas for you in your town. But first, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Canada's History Society, as some of you might not be familiar with the Society as a whole. You might only know about the webinar series. You may be subscribers to Canada's History magazine, formerly known as The Beaver, and didn't even know we were affiliated. So, let me give you the down low on the Society. Canada's History Society is a national charitable organization dedicated to making Canadian history popular for a general audience. We do this in a number of ways, including our flagship publications, Canada's History Magazine, formerly known as The Beaver, and Kayak, Canada's History Magazine for Kids. Canada's History is also responsible for awarding the Governor-General's History Awards. In particular, which one I'm going to talk about today is the Award for Community Programming. So this award aims to inspire small, volunteer-led community organizations in the creation of innovative programming that commemorates unique aspects of our heritage. Each year we select 2 projects of the applicants, and they are awarded $2,500 and a trip for 2 to Ottawa to receive their award at the Governor-General's History Awards at Rideau Hall. The deadline for this award is July 13th. If you are interested in about knowing more about this award in particular, or about our many other awards that we provide, go ahead and click on the link on the screen, canadashistory.ca/awards, and that will bring you to it. So just bookmark it and save it for later. I do want to mention also in regards to this award that if there is something, a group, an event that's happening in your community that you think should be applying for this award, tell us about it. Nominate them for it, and we will get the fire going for them by asking them to apply. We find that it's a great way to get the community to nominate community groups. I think it makes everybody feel good and doing their job in popularizing history, so we can all work together there. In terms of social media and a little bit of housekeeping, I do want to say to prevent any glitches or lagging over the next hour, close any applications that you don't need. So if Photoshop's open, if you have a lot of tabs open in your browsers, bookmark them and close them, and you check them out later. I just want to give you the best experience possible. But if there is any type of technical errors tonight, don't worry so much, because we are recording the webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel at a later date. And if you have registered, you've been getting a lot of emails from me, and you will receive one more letting you know when the recording is available on the YouTube channel. So if you're keen to watch the recording, just sit tight and I will let you know about it as soon as I can. If you are on social media, Facebook and Twitter tonight, go ahead and spread the word about our conversation. You can share the link that I shared with you in the emails today and yesterday, and tell all your friends and invite them in, and hopefully that will foster a great discussion today. And then last but not least, there is a feedback survey. So towards the end, I will share the link to the survey in the chat box. It will also be linked to in the email you will get when the recording is ready. So look forward to that. There are a few things that I'm looking for in the survey, which is different from usual, which is suggestions for our next webinar series. But I will talk more about that towards the end, so keep your ears open. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Danielle McKeshanai. Well, I load up her presentation and she actually introduces herself. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Jessica. And in case you didn't type in your questions throughout the presentation. I'm planning on doing a very casual conversational approach, and it is kind of strange for me. This is my first webinar, and not being able to see anybody. I can't see if you're rolling your eyes at me or yawning or anything else, but on the plus side, we can also chat this way. So feel free to jump in and we'll keep an eye on that chat box to get your questions. There we go. Looks like we are all loaded up. Thanks, Jessica. Well, welcome everybody tonight. I'm also planning to keep this relatively brief because I have a toddler that will descend on the house at 6 o'clock my time here in Edmonton, and that will just, pandemonium will reign. So we're going to aim to wrap up right around 6 o'clock my time. So where do history and community meet in Edmonton? And so I use the abbreviation here, YEG, as Jessica was saying with social media. YEG rules here, maybe because Edmonton's too long. And so really just, to give you a bit of a sense of who I am. I'm the Historian Laureate here in town, and just the fact that Edmonton was the first city in Canada to have a Historian Laureate position should say something about the esteem that it holds heritage, or at least the direction that we're headed in. So I'm the third one. It's been around since 2010, and I started my term in 2014, and I'm in the position until next spring. So I do get dressed and leave my house on occasion to do things around town. Sometimes, actually, Bruce Barrett here is on the webinar, and he's up in Whitehorse, and he might recognize that picture that I took in Dawson City, Yukon a couple of years ago. But it does get pretty cold, and I spend a lot of time in the library and the archives around here. All right, but there's so much to do in Edmonton. One of its nicknames is Festival City, and this is probably one of the more obvious places where history and community meet in the city. And we have so many different festivals that happen year-round, especially in the summertime, of course. So on the top left there with the Chinese animals, that's at Horilac Park in Edmonton during the Heritage Festival. Widely known for being about fried food and meat on a stick, but I really like it as sort of the gateway drug for a lot of people into heritage in the community. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people that come out to this event in August every year, and every different culture community has its own booth and puts on different events and serves food. And so for a lot of people, it's their first exposure to some of these different heritage groups in the city. On the bottom there is a teepee that was put up during the Silver Skate Festival this last year. And I love that so many of these different festivals kind of slide in any type of heritage. We have all these kind of hidden jewels. And so at the Silver Skate Festival, which looks a lot at winter sports in the Winter City, they did have this wonderful pavilion put on by local Indigenous groups. So that was great. This year, we celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Pride Parade here in Edmonton, and the LGBTQ community is very strong here. and is actually currently doing an oral history project. So every different facet of heritage and culture is encapsulated in some of these wonderful festivals. All right, if there's any questions, you feel free to just throw them in there. And if I'm talking too fast, which I'm known to do when I get excited, you can also let me know. All right, so Edmonton, in addition to its festivals, also has a lot of hipsters. And I would say, I don't want to say if we, but the hipsters in the city, a lot of young millennials enjoy kind of sneaking history into different events and entertainment around the city. So we have the High Level Bridge streetcar that runs in the summer across the High Level Bridge over the North Saskatchewan River. And you can take this from the Old Strathcona neighborhood, just on the south side, across the bridge to the north and kind of go between two different wonderful farmers markets and really neat neighborhoods. The streetcar can also be rented for private events. And so as you can see with this kind of musical party that's happening on the slide, some people rent it for concerts. Some have been rented for music video recordings, weddings, birthdays. And so again, this is kind of a neat overlap between the heritage community and the more touristic or entertainment community. And I've ridden over it a few times. It's lots of fun to go and get ice cream with my toddler. So it's introducing, kids of all ages. It's all run by volunteers and really pretty fascinating. So if you are in Edmonton or coming to our fair city, I highly recommend it. So another maybe more typical expression of heritage and community are museums. Except I find that there's a great renaissance happening in Edmonton, and a lot of our major museums are going through some pretty substantial overhauls. The Royal Alberta Museum is getting a brand new home that's been in the works for quite some time, and I've had a chance to peek at some of the design plans, and it looks like it's going to be great. And that's going to be a cornerstone for a whole revitalized core. The downtown area of Edmonton will be sort of rebranded as the Quarters. And having lived in other places like Montreal and visited Stockholm, I think this is a really great direction for integrating heritage with a, usually booming prairie city. So this is something that I'm watching with a keen eye. Other smaller museums, like the Alberta Railway Museum, are also undergoing some of this redevelopment. The Alberta Railway Museum is quite far outside of Edmonton and is again run entirely by volunteers, but they're really trying to change things up a little bit with an eye of incorporating more community events. So right now, my understanding is they are refinishing one of the train cars and hope to host birthday parties in it and movie screening events and things like that. The Alberta Aviation Museum, which is right downtown near the former site of Blatchford Airfield, the first licensed airfield in Canada. And it's housed in a World War II era hangar. It was actually the last double wide, double long hangar in Canada. And they host a lot of events there, but it's an aging infrastructure, it needs a little bit of a facelift, so they're going to some pretty big lengths to make sure that it fits in with the new Blatchford development and can bring that sort of 30,000 strong community that's planned to be living in that sustainable community into the museum and have a lot of back and forth happening there. One of the other big projects that they're involved with, they have a separate field and space up in Villeneuve, and they're currently doing a crowdfunding campaign to bring a Lancaster bomber from the Second World War that's been in Edmundston in New Brunswick across Canada to a new home in Alberta, in Edmonton. So this is something that could be quite interesting, and it's a great overlap between technology and heritage. Fort Edmonton Park is, for many Edmontonians, their first foray after the meat on the stick and the fried food at Heritage Fest into the history of the area. And it basically recreates Oh, hold on, we got a question. Does the plane have history in Alberta? It does apparently have some history flying out of Edmonton into the north, used during the Cold War era in terms of some of uh, the aerial surveying and testing that was happening. So thank you very much for that question. Awesome. Yeah, thumbs up to you too. My grandfather was actually a Lancaster bomber pilot, so this is really interesting to me. And so yeah, Fort Edmonton Park has been around for a while. It is only open from May until October every year, but it tries to pack in a lot of events. You can see these folks here posing for the camera. There's a lot of theater that happens here, some improv. They do a big haunted house every year. There's a lot of interplay with the community. Now again, it's going through another overhaul as the infrastructure can't quite keep up with the demand. So things, really fun, exciting things like water and sewage, all that needs to be upgraded. So they are looking at potentially shutting things down for a period of time in the near future. They're also working on a new section called the Indigenous Peoples Experience. And while they have tried to integrate a lot of the local Indigenous history and Métis history especially into the fort, this is going to be a pretty exciting addition and really follows a lot of the trends in the heritage community here and the city at large of recognizing that we are on Treaty 6 territory and that there is a long history here. All right, if you were at the Canada's History Forum in November, you might recognize this slide. One of the big drivers of this sort of renaissance and heritage in Edmonton is the Edmonton Heritage Council, which came out of the Art of Living document in 2009. It's only been around for those 6 years, but a lot has been happening. So I've included some hyperlinks here and on all of the slides, and feel free to click on those to get some more information, and a few Twitter handles too. Twitter is very popular in Edmonton, and we use the hashtag YEG for everything. So the Heritage Council started off, aside from policy documents, with some really fun local bus tours called the Curiosities Tours. And these were aimed at locals, not at tourists. And so they rented city buses, and about 30 people would prepay and get onto these buses and would be taken around to different sites in the city that had historical significance. So in that photo, for example, or that artist's rendition, you have the Ling Chinese restaurant. And so we went there and had a delicious meal, and all the while learned about some of the history of Chinese market gardens in Edmonton and the Ling in itself. And on that same tour, we went to the Civil Defense Bunker, which is in a Cold War era bunker that is currently unused, and it is in a residential area. So there is a group of people who would love to see it transformed into a museum, possibly a martini bar. That might have been my idea. But they're running into some issues with zoning, with parking, and the fact that it would require a lot of remediation because of the asbestos and other things. But still really neat. And I love the fact that people are having these conversations. And then on the end there, you see the infamous silver balls. It's kind of Edmonton's equivalent of the big metal circle in Calgary. A lot of controversy around those public art dollars, but there you go, it's there. So the Edmonton Heritage Council put on a bunch of these curiosities tours, and then last summer they did a Float Your Boat, and it was basically a flotilla of canoes, and people loaded themselves onto the canoes and went down the Fort Saskatchewan River, while tour guides from the heritage community regaled them with stories of this famous waterway and its importance for the city of Edmonton. So for those of you living in places with water, like Ottawa or Winnipeg or Montreal, pretty much every Canadian city has some, this could be an interesting opportunity for you to pursue. And so below the Heritage Council, they've also instituted the Edmonton Heritage Network, and that encapsulates a lot of the museums that I've mentioned and different heritage groups that you might be interested in. And it's very user-friendly, great interface, so I would check it out. The Maps Heritage is another place where community and heritage are meeting. Basically, people go on and they indicate historically relevant places on an interactive map. And some people have done quite a bit of research connected to these locations. And so right now in the heritage community, we're hearing a lot about placemaking, and it's kind of a buzzword right now. And this is definitely where the Edmonton Maps Heritage fits in. So along with the Edmonton Heritage Council is the Edmonton City as Museum project. Many people don't realize that Edmonton doesn't have a municipal museum, and so there's been some discussion about creating one. And in order to, do all those buzzwords like consult stakeholders and workshop ideas, the Edmonton City's Museum project has come about. It's a website, so it's an electronic hub of a lot of blog entries by interested community members, mostly volunteer written, about interesting people, places, and events connected to the city. But they've also taken over those curiosity bus tours. And so last fall, unfortunately, when I was out of town and I couldn't make it, they did a Beer Curious tour. And they went around with these buses to different locations of beer history in the city. And so they started off at Brewster's, which is just a local brew pub, and then they went to the Yellowhead Brewery and the Musem Brewery and some other places. They even created a limited edition craft beer called the Girder Bender, which turned out to be very appropriate because our new bridge, the Groat Road Bridge, was they had to stall construction because the girders had all bent and they were waiting for them to unbend. So apparently fun was had by all. They're planning another one for next year. And a lot of the people that attended this Beer Curious tour, as you can imagine, were not necessarily history buffs, but beer aficionados. And so this was a way to draw them into the heritage community. We're very sneaky that way. All right, I noticed that I managed to cut off one of the words there. I'm sure it was brilliant. But a new organization that's just taken root, it's a grassroots organization, is Heritage Forward. And it is a group of interested citizens who are primarily concerned with built heritage in the city. So this is not my area of expertise at all, but I was able to moderate the first panel, and they've basically created a series called the Old Yeg Cafe, and it's bringing together different people who are interested in discussions around things like infill, which is a huge discussion here in Edmonton while we're looking at issues of density and sustainability. Also looking at a lot of the older buildings that are being torn down, and which ones we should save, and if there should even be a moratorium on redevelopment of certain sites. So these are some hot button issues for a lot of people, especially those living in more established heritage neighborhoods. Another place or site of community engaging with history are Jane's Walks, and my understanding is they happen across the country. I hadn't heard of them before I moved here, and unfortunately I have not been able to participate in one yet, but it sounds like anyone, a community organizer, an average Joe, can set up one of these Jane Walks in his or her neighborhood, and people sign up and can tag along. And they're wildly popular here. We have at least a dozen every May when they take place. And some people are also looking into potential biking tours, Jane's Bikes, I guess, because some of our neighborhoods are so spread out. All right, some of my favorite ways to engage are to get the kids interested in history. And the City Hall School here, which is located within the Edmonton City Hall, is a fantastic place for that. They made me my own sticker. I get to go in and talk with the kids sometimes as the history lady. And it's just really neat. They take them on tours around the city, and just about every school in Edmonton gets to take part in this every year. There's a limited number of spaces, so sometimes it's not every year for every school, but the kids learn a lot about local heritage and citizenship and all those great things. And I've always been really impressed with the students. So that takes place at City Hall, as I mentioned, just outside of Churchill Square. And that's this programmable space here that you can see where I'm in the red jacket talking with an Edmonton Journal reporter about heritage and history. And so this is a great central space that can be booked, that can be kind of taken over by citizens to talk about heritage. And, I'll show a slide later, but often that, parades will go through there, circle dances. So I've got this thing now where I just kind of keep my eye open. And what are some neat spaces around the city that can be transformed in the blink of an eye into some heritage programmable spaces? So one of those kind of permanent spaces is the Prince of Wales Armories. And that used to be an actual armories, but now it has a bunch of little museums. There's a telephone museum. The Loyal Edmonton Regiment Museum is in there. And upstairs are the offices of the Heritage Council, the Arts Council, and the City of Edmonton Archives. So every year, in the spring, they host the Heritage Fair there. And I got to go and be a judge this year, and it was fantastic. And there were approximately 200 students who took part, everything grades 2 to 6. And as you can see from this young gentleman, they're learning a lot about Canada's history and helping to share that. And so this is a place where a lot of community members come as volunteers, get to interact with the students and encourage their love of history. The parents and the teachers are, of course, very involved. And I hope that your town or city has something similar. And I hope that if you judge, you get to look at one of the projects that looks at maple syrup, because you usually get really good treats. All right, so pop-up museums. This is something that is really exciting to me because it doesn't require a lot of investment, it doesn't require a ton of infrastructure or a permanent building. You can literally have it in the middle of a shopping mall, as this young woman, Christina Hardy, did with her Mill Woods Mythologies project. This was in my neighborhood shopping center. She had a small grant from the Edmonton Cities Museum project, and she set up she got permission from the mall, set up in front of the Shoppers Drug Mart, as you can see, and invited community members to come up and share with her the stories that they had of this particular neighborhood, of this one area, this undeveloped area called the Pits, and of course had some candy to lure them in, and did a great job. And so she had these little sliding clothes racks, and she just put up some blackboards and did a fantastic job. But here's an artist rendition. Actually, this is from local architect Gene Dubb. He did this at a meeting and just, of course, whipped it out very, very quickly. But really, I mean, we have food trucks in Edmonton. What could stop a heritage truck from rolling into your local town center or library parking lot or school? So this is something that we're exploring in more detail, is bringing the heritage out into the community more. And this is especially good for people who have mobility issues or who maybe feel disenfranchised. I've spoken with quite a few people, especially from the communities of newcomers or Indigenous peoples, who felt that there's a barrier to entry to a lot of museums and archives and libraries. So that's something that the heritage community here is working really hard to deal with, and to make people feel like they belong. And part of that feeling of belonging is really coming from the grassroots. So there's an online hub called Make Something Edmonton, and it's currently coordinated by the Edmonton Development Corporation. And anybody and his dog can go on and create a project on this website and have it seen by Edmontonians or people around the world. And so one of my colleagues, Nicole Bart with Memory Catcher, created this one called the Tale Treasury. And that is basically connecting students with the storytellers and the story keepers in their lives, whether it's a relative or perhaps somebody at a senior's residence or someone in their community, their neighborhood. So she is recruiting volunteers to go and speak at some of the local schools about oral history gathering, and of course tailoring that to different grade levels, but trying to strike up this interest in the younger generation. So she's had great success with that. Another one that is quite recent is called In Your Own Words, and that was set up by David Roche and Open Edmonton. And it ties in really well with this great new space that was created recently called the Maker Space at the downtown Edmonton Public Library. So again, this is close to City Hall and Churchill Square. It's right in downtown. And this is in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see the giant screens. So people can go in there and design everything from video games to, there's a green screen on the other side that you can't see in that photo that they can create news broadcasts or videos. There's also an espresso book machine. So individuals can bring in a PDF, perhaps of a family history or a local history, or a graphic novel that they've created about, Alex Dakota, the first Aboriginal police officer in Canada who was here in Edmonton in the early 1900s. They can go, plug in their USB key, and for a small fee, a real looking book, a real live book is spit out the other side. So this is really fantastic. What you also can't see in this photo are two sound booths that are at the far end of the makerspace. And that's what David Roche and his In Your Own Words crew have been harnessing for this project. Basically, they have done a series of evenings. I believe it was every Wednesday evening from 5 to 8. They would invite community members to the space through social media, through their own community connections, to talk on different themes. And speaking with David, he would also, if they had a slow period or a lull, he would grab local patrons of the library to come and share a story. And he said it was often those ones that were the most interesting and stirring. In Edmonton, like a lot of cities, the primary purpose of the library is often social outreach. And so especially at the downtown location, there are a lot of at-risk populations. And he learned a lot about their journeys with homelessness and addiction. And this is an important part of the Edmonton story and will become this archive for future researchers. So all these stories are being archived on SoundCloud, a digital platform that is up there in the internet, and he's hoping to get 250 stories, discrete stories up there, and people could remain anonymous if they wanted, but most people chose to share their information, which I thought was great. So I actually tagged along onto one of David's evenings. We did a special one on May 19th, just last Tuesday, and this was to gather stories around the Charles Camsell Hospital here in Edmonton. So when we talk about sites of community and history meeting, this is both a physical site, but also a city site or an imaginary site. I created a serialized blog, history blog that's online. It's the Ghosts of Camsell project, again through a small Edmonton City as Museum project grant. And this blog went on, I posted daily for 3 weeks starting in the end of March, and it looks at primarily the Indian hospital period. So this is from 1946 to 1966. Now most Edmontonians only know the abandoned building that's been sitting in the Inglewood neighborhood for close to 10 years. Gene Dubb and this consortium of architects are redeveloping the site, but it has been a long process. And so it actually developed the reputation of being the most haunted site in Edmonton. And a lot of people know it as the place where you broke into to look for ghosts or maybe go skateboarding in the winter. That's sort of on the mainstream side of things, but talking to my Indigenous friends and colleagues, it soon became clear that this was had a much different meaning in the Aboriginal community. And so through my research, I discovered that it was a tuberculosis sanatorium operated by the federal government, and that there was a cairn, which you can see on the slide, that was erected in the Aboriginal cemetery in St. Albert, which is just a neighboring city to Edmonton. And through this online site, this blog, I started getting emails and messages from not only local Edmonton people who had connections with the hospital during its long existence, but also from people beyond the community. I was getting notes from people in the Yukon and in the Northwest Territories and in Nunavut especially, asking for information on loved ones who had never returned home after being evacuated for tuberculosis treatment. So this is an ongoing project. I'm still doing research, but it has really become both a figurative and literal site of the intersections of the mainstream understanding of this history and the Aboriginal understanding in the community. So this is, as you can imagine, quite intense work, but very rewarding. And I'm helping one lady track down her grandfather as we speak. On the same lines, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but our mayor, Don Iveson, declared after the public events of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to a close last year that Edmonton would enter a year of reconciliation. So that just wrapped up. We did a walk for reconciliation. This is the banner that we walked behind to Churchill Square. And these kind of events help to engage community members with the history and legacy of the residential school system in Canada. And now, of course, with the TRC wrapping up this weekend with closing events in Ottawa, we have some similar events happening in Edmonton. So there's going to be live streaming, and that can transform any space really into a heritage space, whether it's a pub or a big screen in a park or a library programming room. So there's so many ways to engage with that. And the city and some members of the Aboriginal community are working to create a sacred fire that will burn in Churchill Square for the duration of the TRC closing events. Now, one particular grassroots project that is actually up on that Make Something Edmonton page is the Rise Heart Garden. And this is a group that just got started in the last couple of weeks. It's called RISE, stands for Reconciliation in Solidarity Edmonton. And the Heart Garden follows the idea of Kairos and TRC. If you Google KAIROS, and I'll type that in there as well, you can find out information about this whole initiative of heart gardens. They're going to plant one at Rideau Hall in Ottawa, but communities across the country are also doing this. And so here in Edmonton, we're fundraising and planning to do a worker bee, and we're hoping to take over one big space with at least 500 hearts. And each heart has a message of hope for survivors, both of residential schools, but also intergenerational survivors, and some perhaps notes to all of us, to all Canadians, about this legacy and how we want to move forward in the conversation. So some people are doing paper ones, others are doing permanent ones, but this is something that you and your community or your school might be interested in looking into. So that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. I'm hoping that you're all still awake. I was going to say asleep. I hope you're still awake. I have not seen too many questions, so I hope there's a few saved up. And just this final slide, just to show you that heritage really doesn't always have to be serious, and we have a lot of fun here in Edmonton. The Heritage Council puts on heritage socials. I'm hoping to do a karaoke one in honor of Throwback Thursday sometime this summer. We talk about heritage through nerd nights and geek dinners and pechakuchas. We even had the walrus talks here recently for the Aboriginal city. So really there are so many opportunities to slide heritage into the conversation and to make community members more aware of the local, regional, and national history. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions. And if you don't have questions, we're going to sit here in awkward silence for the next 15 minutes. I'm just kidding.
Uh, Kurt, Kurt has a question. He sent it to both me and Danielle. He asks, have you heard about the historic urban landscape project in Old Strathcona?
That rings a bell, but I haven't heard too many details about it. Can he type some information and I can tell the group? And in the meantime, I've also got a question from Bruce, and he asks, are there doors open events there? And yes, there are. We have a lot of different events that I didn't even get to mention. Doors Open, I believe, happens in September, and yes, churches, heritage organizations, everybody throws open their doors for people to come and take a peek. And then Norma, so the hospital building, yes, it's still there. It is currently being remediated, so they've taken the asbestos out, and it's been kind of a white elephant. It's been sitting there for 10 years since it was decommissioned in 1996. Gosh, it's even longer now. We're going on 20 years. And the plan is it will be turned into townhomes and condos. It's on a very large parcel of land in the middle of a residential area. So people in the neighborhood are looking forward to there being something there. So did we get the information about the historic in Old Strathcona from Kurt, was it? Jessica, you still there?
Yep, it's coming to you right now. I'm just copying it from a separate conversation. Here we are.
All right. Oh, historic urban landscape approach and how it could be applied to Old Strathcona's future management plans. So I haven't heard of the historic urban landscape approach. As I mentioned before, the built heritage side of things is not my specialty, so I am learning a lot about this from people like the last Historian Laureate, Shirley Lowe. She is really up on all of this, but getting to sit on that panel was fascinating because we had a developer, we had somebody who was a concerned citizen, we had Shirley, and then there was a comptroller as well, sort of he's the one that looks at these projects and decides can they afford it in a budget sense to keep just the facade or to tear it down and start over. So it's really, really interesting. So there's the UNESCO initiative. So Jessica, am I correct in reading that properly? That this urban landscape approach is espoused by UNESCO?
Yes.
Yeah. And there is going to be a big conference in Calgary in October around this. And so I'm planning to attend that and soak it all in. Great questions. Anything else?
Danielle, I'm wondering, what advice do you have for just the general community in getting involved in finding these groups and these projects in their own provinces and their own cities? And in addition to that, what advice can you give active history enthusiasts in their communities advice on how to start something like along the lines of these projects?
Good questions. So Edmonton seems to be going through this real dynamic phase, and we talk about this prairie urban barn building mentality, and it seems like if somebody has an idea, two more people come along and they go, hey, let's just do this. So I find what seems to be working really well in Edmonton is just having conversations. And so whether that's on social media or through different organizations, is just getting out there and finding like-minded people and talking up your project or your idea. And we're really lucky here. I find that the local media is very interested in a lot of these community-driven projects, and so the local CBC stations on TV, radio, local newspapers, all of them are really good about giving us space. Everybody, sort of from the average citizen up through the Heritage Council, it seems like those are great ways to connect with other people who are interested, and also to get the word out to the community to invite them in. I can't say enough about social media. That's one of my big interests, is how heritage and technology can intersect. And if you can find out what the local hashtags are for the communities, you are probably going to hook into some really interesting conversations. So on Twitter or Instagram, we often use hashtags, that number sign. And I find on Facebook, we have some very active groups in Edmonton. Sometimes they're closed and you wouldn't necessarily stumble across them. But if you go into the search bars for Facebook and just start typing in keywords, it's amazing what you'll find. We have one here in Edmonton called, Historic Northern Alberta and Edmonton, I believe, and there's 900 members, and it's a closed group. And there's another one for I'm obsessed with the Charles Camsell Hospital that has 700 members. So it's kind of crazy. You never really know where you're going to run into people, but that seems to be the way that things are happening here. Is it really is just one conversation at a time. Does that answer your question, Jessica?
It does the first part, but we can get back to the second part after the next two questions in the chat box.
Sure. Okay, so Carolyn is asking about the relationship with the library. My understanding, so the library offers space. You can book the maker space, you can book the programming rooms, but the rest of it is up to the individual groups. So, for example, in your own words, the program that David Roche is coordinating right now, he is uploading all that to the SoundCloud, but also hoping to put those sound files into the City of Edmonton archives or into the provincial archives here in Edmonton. So it's really up to every individual group to document their events. And this is, of course, happening with different success rates. So the archives are doing a lot of outreach right now to connect, especially with small volunteer, we call them cultural communities here in Edmonton, for lack of a better term. But for example, we have Memoria Viva, which is a Latin American group that are working on their own internal small archives. There's a Chinese Benevolent Society. So there are different ways that the archival structure works with these groups to try to make sure that everything's being preserved. But a lot of us in Heritage are introverts, so this is sometimes a bit of a stretch, and we're all working to build these bridges and to make these relationships stronger. The other question, and Carolyn, if I didn't answer that as fully as you'd like, please do a follow-up. But we have someone else who is asking, is the university's history department doing things to connect with the broader community? I am not very connected with the history department. That's actually on my to-do list. I've been meaning to chat with them more since December. There is some connection for sure. So some members of the history department actually sit on the board of the Heritage Council or are involved with organizing and executing different heritage events. Like we had a symposium in 2013 that tried to connect a lot, but I do still find that there is a public history and an academic history. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited that I'll be attending Congress in Ottawa next week for the Canadian Historical Association conference and giving a talk there. Is I come from an academic history background, and I don't know a lot of the people here in town, or haven't really stayed in touch with a lot of the academic historians across Canada. So I think there is a lot of outreach happening with people like James Dashik, for example, and Clearing the Plains, but we can definitely do more to talk to each other. I think a lot of it comes down to time and energy and just making a big effort. So I see also that Kurt has mentioned that the U of A has over 24 museums on campus. They sure do. They've got lots of museums tucked away all over the place. And also archives, and the Sam Steele collection was donated to the U of A, or acquired, I should say, in the last few years. So there's somebody mentioned there that we need to do better on relating. We all do. We talk about here in Edmonton about silos, and that can happen within our own heritage communities, within our own faculties or departments. And I'm a huge fan of interdisciplinarity. And I've been chatting a lot with the people with folklore studies and disability studies and human ecology and archaeology and anthropology. And I think there's a lot of exciting overlap and a lot of great learning to be had. All right. And
Point B it is. So you did my questions, actually, now that I think about it. But I did have a follow-up, and that is, what are the tips, or what are the key things that people starting their own events and projects need to think about going in?
oh my goodness, tips. Okay. I would say volunteer management is a big one. Looking for available grants in your communities. Sometimes you can get them for individuals, but often it seems they have to go through a body with a board of directors and all that, for accountability and transparency. Let's see. Okay, grants. Some kind of communications platform that you're comfortable with. Even if it's a phone tree, it seems like that's one place where I've seen some people fall down flat, is they get something exciting going, but there isn't any follow-up. And Grassroots is great, but I feel my experience shows me that a certain amount of organization and leadership is so essential. And so having somebody who's a decent communicator on your core team, who can keep people in the loop, someone who can write grant proposals is fantastic. Figuring out on the small scale, just, starting maybe from one event and building up from there, but then quickly looking at strategy, because the ad hoc can get kind of strange after a time, she said, speaking from experience. And then looking for partners. And I would say actually the biggest thing, and this is, I think, one challenge we're seeing in Edmonton, is that everybody has a great idea, but sometimes the resources get spread too thin. And so check and see if there's something out there already that you can piggyback on, or that you could join on. We don't necessarily have to create all these little ponds, maybe all together we can make a big lake or a river or something. I don't know how far this water metaphor is going to stretch, but that's something that I've noticed across several different organizations and groups that I've worked with, is sometimes something is already out there and you can just hook onto that and strengthen it. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel.
Excellent. Thank you, Danielle. And thank you for the entire presentation.
Oh, thanks to all of you. This was too easy. I was expecting some hecklers.
Maybe Paula will heckle you.
Maybe Paul. There we go. I've unleashed the beast. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for your great questions, and just such a pleasure. If you ever come to Edmonton, please look me up. My website is www.daniellemc.com. You can find me on Twitter at Danny Canuck, and yeah, I'll be in Ottawa for the next week. If you're around there too, drop me a line.
Great. On that note, I just have a few final remarks, and one of that is
before the toddler comes.
Yes, I'm working into that time frame. I just sent out the link for the survey, so go ahead and click on that and do it right now while you're sitting at your computer. I would be very grateful. Also, in that survey, I'm hoping you can include commentary on what kind of topics you want to see in a women's history webinar series, and if you have a webinar presenter in mind, go ahead and suggest them as well. We are all ears. We are spending the summer planning out this series, so now is the time to give us those suggestions and to actually see them put in action. And finally, thank you once again for everybody for attending these webinars live as part of the Historic Venue series. For each webinar you have attended live, you will receive one entry in a draw to win one of 3 books published by Canada's History. The draw will take place this Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and after the winner is contacted and confirmed, we will announce it on Facebook and Twitter. So if you've been attending a lot of these webinars, if you've registered and attended, including tonight's, be sure to be checking your email on Friday, because that's when we'll be trying to contact you. That is everything from me. Thank you once again, Danielle, and everybody for participating. Have a great summer.